So today we're going to be talking a little bit about silviculture treatments and rates, and talk a little bit about how they work on private land. So there's 7 different categories of silviculture treatments. There's fill planting, which is category 1. There's category 2, which is full planting. And then you've got category 3, which is early competition control, also called manual weeding. You might hear it referred to. Category 4 and 5 are density control and releases. So 4 is a PCT in an area that was planted, and 5 is a PCT in an area that regenerated naturally. And then category 6 is commercial thinning, and then category 7 is our hardwood treatments. So there's crop tree release, crop tree pruning, and selection management. So like Sean had talked about earlier, there's kind of 2 different funding sources. So there's the Registered Buyers Program, and then there's the Association for Sustainable Forestry. So each treatment has a different rate. So for fill planting, if you're planting less than 300 trees per hectare, it's $70 per hectare. So that $70 per hectare would get paid to the contractor that's planting the area, or if you were a landowner who was planting their own land, then that would go to you to pay for your seedlings. And then same for full planting, but that's $850 per hectare. So a little bit higher for areas that aren't as regenerated. Early competition control or manual weeding is $400 per hectare. So that is a treatment that would be done to a younger area prior to pre-commercial thinning. Category 4 and 5, those are the PCTs like I talked about. Those are both $800 per hectare. Commercially thinning, which we don't do a whole lot of here on Cape Breton, that's $550 per hectare. And then for category 7, it's listed here as credits, so 3 credits per tree for crop tree release, 300 credits per hectare for crop trees pruned, and 550 credits per hectare for selection management, and that's interchangeable basically with the dollar value, right?
Yeah, it's assumed that by most.
Yeah, so did anybody have questions about specific treatments?
For the, sorry. Just for the PCT, does it matter about density? Like, are you doing like rate-based?
So, the minimum density is 1,500 stems per hectare in order for it to qualify.
Post-treatment, like after it's done.
Yes, post-treatment. So if you had an area that was cut that was less than that, it wouldn't qualify for the PCT because it has to maintain a minimum of 1,500 stems per hectare following the treatment. And for a planted area that's going to be pre-commercially thinned, the stocking of the natural and planted softwood trees needs to be 85% or more. And for those natural stands, the stocking has to be greater than 80%. So once the treatment is done, an ideal number of trees in a plot that's 3.99 meters. The minimum amount of trees would be 8. The ideal number is 10 trees in that plot. Yeah.
The stocking is usually the most limiting thing over the density. So the density is just how thick it is and the rate you might or how hard it is to do. But if you don't have that minimum stocking, it won't qualify and won't get paid for. So if you have an area and you do the pre-treatment assessment and it comes out to 75% stocking, it won't get paid for it. So that's usually the most limiting thing. You have to have over the area 80% stocked of commercial softwood species at 2.4 meter spacing. Yeah.
So it's just the softwood trees that are counted in that density?
No, it's all the crop trees. So
they're split up.
Commercial softwood, you said there.
Yeah,
You can still
there's
have
hardwood
trees.
PCT and there's softwood PCT, they're two separate
Okay.
categories, and you can't have a mixed one, but it just goes into softwood usually. So if it goes in the softwood category, you gotta, yeah, here it is here.
Yeah, so this is for the plantation. So these are your acceptable crop tree species. And the height minimum is between 2 and 6 meters on average. So if it's past 6 meters, it won't qualify for the funding. If it's under 2 meters, it won't qualify for the PCT, but it might qualify for a manual weeding depending on the stocking. If it's a hardwood PCT, the average height is between 6 and 9 meters in order for it to qualify for a PCT.
But if you do an area, you're gonna have some trees that are over
Oh yeah,
6 meters.
yeah. So as long as
Just to keep
they average
Holes
out,
from being created in the stand,
yeah,
you still count them because you're leaving them rather than cutting
Yeah.
them down.
you would still
Yeah.
count
Yeah.
those, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So normally how it works within CBPP when I'm planning is when we basically have a big database of all our management plans and all the stands and the treatment that the cruiser would have recommended. So if an area comes up that was harvested 2 years ago, I know it's ready to plant this year. So the process is I reach out to the landowner, and if they're interested in having it planted, we would go out, assess the site to make sure that it qualifies. And then if it does, if the landowner had a contractor that they specifically wanted to work with, we would work with them to facilitate the planting. So we would pay the contractor the $8.50 a hectare to plant the lot, and the contractor would use part of that $8.50 to pay for the seedlings that are going into the ground. We have a couple, very few landowners, but a few that like to do their own silviculture work, so in that case the money would go to the landowner. We also like to do active inspections on any of our silviculture blocks, and then we would go back after the job is done to inspect the job to make sure it meets all the post-treatment criteria.
If the landowner doesn't have a contractor that they work with, do you guys connect landowners and contractors?
Yeah, so we kind of have a base of contractors that we use. So if the landowner doesn't have anybody in mind, we would then give the job to one of our contractors to take on. Yep.
I have a question about the category 7. So the last time I looked into it, I think the person who prepares the plan for the category 7 has to have, certain credentials. And I was just wondering, there was a reference to a course that they needed to have. And I was just wondering, as someone who's sort of interested in getting into that kind of work, how do you do it? What kind of training, or
Yeah.
is it enough if you're a registered professional forester, and how does that work?
So the training that you're talking about is being certified in pre-treatment assessments,
Yes.
and that course is put on by the Nova Scotia DNR.
Through ASF though.
And
Yeah. Yeah. So ASF, so if you reached out to ASF and got your name on a list, or a DNR, they also keep a list, but you might not get to the right person. But I'd call it ASF
Okay.
and say I'd like to be put on the list for the next available PTA course.
Okay.
And if you're you do have to be a forester or a
Yeah.
forest technologist to be able to take that course. That's the prerequisite.
Okay.
And then you can go. But I should mention on private land, if a job is less than 5 hectares, you don't need the PTA. It's just an economy of scale thing, like it's a lot of work to go in for a 5-hectare site. And also, that's through ASF. And if you go through the Registry of Buyers program, of which Breah and my group each have a budget for, we don't require PTA because they don't fund the PTA for it.
Right.
So you can go without it on private if it's a relatively smaller area. But if it's 20, 30 hectares and you want to do the whole thing,
then
You might wanna get the PTA done, yeah, but smaller areas can kind of fly under the radar
So.
and
who-
still get funded.
Okay, so do you know who the best person to talk to at ASF is about that and approximately how often they put the course on?
Yeah, it's usually 1 to 2 times a year. The course is broken up into 3 parts now. It used to be one course, and now it's your forest ecosystem classification and soil typing, and then the pre-treatment assessment part of it itself, which is more like stand level assessments for biodiversity and wildlife and stick nests and all that stuff. And that's a new portion, that's the 3rd part. So now it's 3 separate courses, and they don't always go back to back to back, so you kind of might get the first 2 in one go and then wait for the 3rd one to be offered. But it's worth doing even just if you're interested in it.
Yes,
I
yeah,
found it
yeah.
incredibly interesting when I did it. You learn a lot.
Yeah, actually, we have 2 staff from ASF across from the room.
Pardon me?
There are 2 people already from ASF
Right.
here.
Oh,
So,
yes.
But
yeah.
you could just call the number or ask for Dave Sutherland.
Dave,
Yeah,
okay, yeah.
anybody there will get you on the list.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
How long is that course?
I haven't taken it in a while. You took it more
The
recently.
FEC, just the FEC portion is 3 days. Yeah, so that's only one portion of the course. I haven't taken the PTA yet. Megan, you have.
It was a
right?
week, so we did the 3-day FEC, and then we did 2 days of strictly PTA, and then the biodiversity training itself was an additional 2 days.
So, yeah,
So
a week
it's-
in total.
It's a time commitment, yeah.
Yeah. But like Pete said, they don't do it all at the same time. Now it's broken up.
The other thing is it's required for Crown land prescriptions, so they can't go do a harvest without a proper pre-treatment assessment done. So if you see a harvest on the harvest planner online or whatever, they have to have a certified PTA person go out and do a proper PTA for all those planned things on all Crown land now.
Okay, so it's the same.
It's
the
required.
same- It's the same course,
Yeah.
either if you're doing it for Crown.
They usually
or
offer
for
the
county
Crown
person.
employees their own course.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes they'll combine them if it
Right.
works, but they'll do one for the non-Crown like
Yeah.
everybody else.
Yeah.
And they'll do one for the Crown
Yeah.
staff or DNR staff. But, so that's required for them, so that's why it's an intensive course and they can afford to do it with their time. It's all part of staff training. For everybody else, it's kind of like you could be an independent consultant, you could work for an
Yeah.
organization on staff time, and so it's a bit more, it's 2 different beasts really. And it's not, like, to get a claim through ASF on a category 6 or 7, you need a PTA, but only greater than 5 hectares, so it's still pretty flexible
Yeah,
to be able to do it without,
okay.
yeah, for sure.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Or the other thing is, sorry, and for anybody, but if you wanted it assessed, you could reach out to us in this region, or we could point you to people in other regions that can do PTAs,
Right.
that are already qualified. Yep.
Question over here?
My property's been under forest management plan, Cape Breton Private Land Partnership, since the beginning. And over the years, I've been doing treatments on my property. And when I talk to people at Cape Private Land Partnership, they say all the funding has been used up for that year, so I never put in for it.
Right.
So, is it possible to still, use that work that I did for funding?
Technically, it's supposed to be the year the treatment was done, but there's some flexibility there. I don't think I'd go back 5-10 years, but you could go back 2-3 years and combine a bunch of areas, especially if you dabbled in that same area in the most recent year.
Right,
You could that wouldn't be much of an issue.
okay.
Yeah, and it varies year to year how much funding gets spent. So some years it might get spent fast, some years we might not spend the whole amount. So certainly if there's areas that you're thinking of that you're gonna be doing work on, we could certainly try and get you some funding.
Okay.
Greg, just reach out, and if you have the stand numbers, tell us what stand numbers, and you can
Yeah,
probably send someone out to check it.
okay.
Yeah.
There's no planting of hardwoods though, eh?
Well,
Not through the provincial system, not really, no.
yeah, most of the nurseries around here are just growing spruce.
It would be at
Yeah.
cost, so it would be at your own personal
Yeah.
cost, there's no funded category, so you could order hardwood seedlings go to the nursery, pay for them, pick them up, buy the fancy cones to protect them from deer and rabbits, and then go do the work and all out of pocket, but there's no funding programs for it.
This is a perfect plug for Morgan.
I was gonna say nothing, but,
So that's what's been happening to all my red oak trees, the deer right behind me.
Yeah.
if you're interested, with ACAP Cape Breton, where's your land located?
In Antigonish County.
Antigonish County? Oh, okay, yeah, we're just doing it on the island,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Yeah, but I actually am running a program that plants hardwood trees.
Oh, right on.
But, yeah, no, we're not going off island, unfortunately.
Is it like a funded program?
Yep.
Oh, cool.
Most
So there's like no landowner cost or anything, or? Oh, awesome.
Frank, just meet him in Port Hastings.
Where do you get your hardwood trees from? Eon or?
Yeah, we kind of wherever we can get, sort of thing, yeah, in talks with, a few different places, but,
They mentioned today earlier that they're growing some different things at the Strathmore nursery, but, for climate adaptation. You don't know what species they're dabbling in there.
they don't tell me anything.
There's a big push with the 2 billion tree project, like that
Yeah.
federal 10-year
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And the biggest challenge I'm hearing is getting seed stock. So I think right now there's a push for seed collection so they can start growing off species, like non-standard commercial species.
If
There's
any-
lots of white spruce and not much else.
I know the National Tree Seed Center that's based out of Fredericton, they're always looking for new seed collections. So if anyone has yellow birch, sugar maple, anything, they're always looking for more stock, and they'll come to your property and collect seed. So if you think you might have it, the National Tree Seed Center would be a good organization to contact. And they bank the seeds for well into the future.
Do they pay you for it, or is it just?
No.
Shucks.
Did anybody have any other questions about any specific treatments or general silviculture questions? No? Sit here. Which one do we have?
This is, we're focusing on what we have a budget for, which is the technical standards for the Registry of Buyer System. So these categories are what can get funded in our budget. There are other things like ACAP, for example, but the Family Forest Network project has a silviculture. Can you put a browser up for Family Forest Network? Can you just go to the, don't hit the NSCC page. It's the, yeah. So this is a project that's going on. If you don't know what it, just Google it and check it out. But if you go to, sorry, yeah, the publications, and then at the bottom, keep going down. These three here are restoration, the third one, restoration thinning specifications. This is a category that's been created to try and address pre-commercial thinning areas that are too tall. They've already exceeded the window of eligibility, like they're over 6 meters, 7 meters for softwood, and they're over 9 meters for hardwood, but they're not commercial yet. So in other words, a lot of areas in the province got missed for PCT. So we have a lot of thick stands that are growing unmerchantable. They're not going to get the size they need, and so this category in this project is meant to try and space stuff that's too tall for standard PCT, basically. So that is out there. It does. I'm not sure where it stands right now, but the intent was it'll pay so much a hectare, and it's expecting the landowner to kick in like $200-300 a hectare.
Yeah, it's 25%, so
25%.
it would be about $300 per hectare for the restoration thinning.
Yeah. So that is there, just so people know about it. Yeah. And it's a pilot, so it's not just open indefinitely, but it's there. Yeah. So if you got a lot of people come to us and say, someone told me my area is too tall for spacing, and in the past we'd say, well, there's no funding category for it, but if you want and you're motivated, then you could try and apply for that stuff.
What can you say about the use of herbicides for release and stuff like that? Is that
something that's potentially gonna get funded again, or is that just dead in the water?
I would assume it was dead in the water for a long time, but I know, the mill is toying with the idea of bringing it back on some of their ground. I don't think they've decided, I think they're just discussing it right now.
Yeah, Sean did a presentation about the intensive side of it.
Yeah.
And he said that herbicides were a critical tool.
All right, so, and that's when it would be for intensive areas.
It would be
Yes,
like
yeah.
high production forestry.
That's
type,
right.
is
Right,
what
so-
we're
Yeah.
looking at for.
Does that mean that potentially the government's gonna start funding that through the ASF?
I don't
again?
think the government will fund any herbicide, no. Maybe you could get it through a registered buyer system if they're gonna do it on their own.
And do you know if anybody in the province that's actually spraying sites now?
Northern Pulp used to still do it up until
Yeah.
they slowed down, and I don't know if anybody is. I think if you can just ask, point blank, yeah, because up until a couple of years ago, for sure, they were still spraying for Northern Pulp logs, I think. I really don't know, I would assume they do.
Yes.
Yeah, I think they're pretty hard on it, yeah.
They were doing something called pot planting too, where
Yeah.
they wouldn't wait for 2 years, they'd plant it,
Yeah.
they do some site prep and plant.
If you do the site prep, it works, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the high lobius beetle that you gotta get
Is
past.
Hylogia still an issue?
Yeah,
Sorry.
Still as big as what it ever was?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
We still spray power lines.
But yeah, there's a call for more scarification. Anybody that was in the ASF thing, they have a new round of funding available to scarify hurricane sites for planting. It's just coming out.
Folks need to spray
Like,
there.
it was just sort of signed a couple weeks ago. It's federal money. They got like $7 million to do regen assessments, scarification and planting on all the sites that were salvaged from harvest, so that all that ground comes operable again, or fully stocked.
So does that mean you can plant like the year after and don't have to worry about?
Yeah,
the
they don't have to follow provincial rules per se, they can sort of set, within reason, set their own
Okay.
rules for it, so, and I don't know how far it's gonna get, cause they have to spend it within one fiscal, and to get up to capacity for 6,500 hectares, it's not gonna happen, but the program's there, so.
And
If you
that's
have a
under-
hurricane salvage site, it's worth looking into.
That's under ASF.
Yeah, everything's through ASF for hurricane.
Are there any, do you know what the requirements for like equipment are for the scarification, or can you?
Well, I think there's only a couple of
that you want?
groups outfitted to be able to do it, like Scott and
Scott
Stewart still
Stewart
has
is the
it.
main one that does
Yeah.
this, yeah.
And it's either disc trench or the chain, the barrels of chains. So it's like, I don't know which one is for which rationale, but it's only, I think there's only 2 options, yeah.
But that would be specified in the program.
Yeah, I think it's through the regen survey. So someone goes out and does a regen survey and they say, yes, this needs to be planted, and yes, it needs to be scarified, and I recommend disc trencher for this
Oh, okay.
site. So they've got people specified to go through the regen assessments, and that's happening at that stage. So I would ask, if you have a site that's been harvested through salvage, even if it wasn't claimed, any hurricane salvage, it doesn't have to be previously claimed through ASF, just any hurricane salvage at all for replanting, I would just contact them and say you want to get a regen assessment done for hurricane harvest, yeah. I think they're gonna have their hands full. They got a lot of money and too short a time to get it up to capacity and spend it, yeah. But maybe it'll extend another year.
You don't have any copies of that?
Not at this specific page. There are some copies of the different treatment specs up here on the front table. But this is all available online if you just Google the Registered Buyers Program 2023.
Okay.
That'll come up. Yeah.
And on the right, on that page, the Registry of Buyers Resources, that kind of explains the whole system and has, like, the technical standards is the legislation itself. It's all embedded in the legislation. So when you hit that, you have to scroll down and you'll see the same table. Yeah. But it explains the categories, right? This is right out of the legislation. And then the other things are like previous Registry of Buyer reports. They give you the summary for all wood harvested and silviculture done in every year. And all those reports are available there. So if you're curious, it's a good resource to understand it all.
Yeah, and I guess for anyone doing silviculture on their lot through this funding, the only requirement is that it must stay forested for at least 10 years.
You can't go out and get planting done and then turn it into subdivision lots the next summer. You gotta wait 10 years.
Yeah, so as far as CVPP goes, we did a lot of planting last year for silviculture. That's where a lot of our budget was spent. But a little different this year. There's a bit of a seedling shortage, so we're focusing a lot on pre-commercial thinnings and manual weedings as well. And I think, like I mentioned before, we don't do a whole lot of commercial thinnings. There's certainly lots of hardwood here in Cape Breton, but we don't find that there's many contractors that actually do those treatments. So that's kind of, I guess, been a struggle as well.
Not to stop the subject, but it kind of bothered me the other day when I was listening to the news. And a lot of these pallet homes that they're building for Nova Scotia are coming out of Maine. Why would that ever happen? And, you know, there's an opportunity there. We've got the resource to build these things. And we've got a, you know, is there anyone that'd be interested in taking a contract like that to do that type of thing?
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard of that before though.
Yeah.
Like there's
I
must
mean,
be
taking
closer to
them,
the
I mean,
top.
even transporting them
Yeah.
here.
Apparently they cost $30,000 each.
American? That's 40,000.
I've seen on Canadian $30,000.
It's unbelievable.
Frank, the only thing I can say is stop listening to the news. That's the only way to solve it.
Does that planting at $850, does that cover all the costs of purchasing the seedlings and the planters putting them in the ground?
Yeah,
Is there?
That's all that's available for it, yeah.
The planting contractor never says I need more, that's enough?
They always say it, but
You never-
that's it. Yeah. So our groups, we administer registry of buyers budgets. So the mills purchase wood, and the amount of wood they purchase dictates how much money they gotta put in the silviculture system the next year. And they have to get that administered, and it's not a fun job, so they subcontract it to us because we have a landowner base. And so we're tied to those rules. A landowner could contribute, that would be the
Does that
only,
happen?
never,
Never,
no, not in my experience,
yeah.
yeah. I think in different jurisdictions it probably happens, and there's different norms and social norms and cultural norms. Like in the 80s and 90s, there was $1 million per county per year to do fire ponds, roads, boundary lines, PCT, planting, everything. So anybody that was around then got used to that, and you don't often see anybody pony up for anything from that hangover.
Right.
But we see new landowners come in that weren't aware of that, and they're like, how come I don't have to, they don't understand why everything's free in some cases, right? Or where they don't have to pay.
Well, they do really, because it wasn't supposed to be taken off the stumpage price.
Well, yeah, for sure.
That's what they said.
Yeah, but not everybody that's getting planted is off their own harvest, right? It could be,
Right.
or not anybody doing PCT that could have bought the woodlot the year before and never sold stumpage.
Yeah.
So it's always different, but the best I've ever heard is in like Norway and those places. There's a tax credit fund where if you harvest, I think it's even required that you hold back like 15% of your harvest revenues in an escrow account for future silviculture. So that's the only way it's ever really gonna happen to scale, right? Everybody has to keep a forestry bank account, woodlot bank account when they get a harvest on it. And that's where your future infrastructure money comes from for your woodlot.
Yeah.
Plus government funding, and maybe the two together trying to get everything done. But I think we're a long ways from that. Yep.
Peter, are you familiar with what they do in the United States?
Not really.
Do they have these types of programs?
Yeah, but I don't know them. Every place has got their own version of doing things, but I have no idea how they do it. And I'd say it's different probably everywhere in the States, state by state.
Do you know of any other areas? Have you done any conferences to Europe or?
I was in Finland, I got a pretty good insight into their
And what do you
system.
think?
It's amazing.
Very progressive?
In wood
In the right
growing,
way.
in wood growing, they're very much like the intensive plantation side of things. Everything's about growing wood, but the culture is such that nobody like harvests ahead of time. So nobody liquidates their land. They only harvest an area when it's maxed out its growth and it's at the end of its rotation. They don't go in 35 years early and do it. So everybody manages to the highest value, and they all do the treatments that are needed to get it there. So it's a real cookie cutter: harvest, scarify, plant, fertilize when you're planting, space twice, commercial thin twice, harvest at 90 years. And the biggest harvest blocks are like 2 hectares. So, but their biodiversity side is like the opposite end of it, because they've been growing wood like farms for so long. Now, the reason it works, after understanding it all and seeing everything, every landowner, and this was Todd talking about the power in numbers, every landowner there had to be, by law, join a co-op since like 1895. So the reason all the landowners belong to a co-op is because they were legislated to. And that's why you have 100% uptake in all these programs, because it's the law. So as a landowner, it's not like pull out the shotgun and say, it's my land, don't tell me what to do. It's like, it's a cultural thing that you're born into, and you just have to do it that way. It's kind of, things have changed recently. I think 10 years ago they did away with the requirement to belong to a co-op, but 85% of them still do, because that's the norm.
Is there any wildlife on this type of land?
Yeah, but they're more, it's not, you can't compare apples to apples, because they're more of a boreal type, like a ideal boreal type. They have the Gulf Stream, they have good growth rates, good growing seasons. And so they have their own specific wildlife, but it's more like, you think of our wildlife is so diverse because our forests are so diverse. But if you go to a boreal forest, there's like, you can count them on 2 hands, like the common wildlife species, because it's the only forest type there is. So it's not a real fair or equal comparison. It'd be like comparing like really good growth on the softwood highlands, like to the taller hardwood uplands, right? It's 2 different forest communities, 2 different ecosystems. But there's lots of interesting, good lessons to learn there from the collective of it. Like everybody is, here, if 60% of the forest is privately owned and nobody is part of the same organization, or very few, like there's no power in numbers. It's just power in small collectives, like little local grassroots groups like ours, but there's no common everybody belongs to, and then you have the power of the 60% of the land base. So it's different here.